where were you when you heard about the dropping of the atomic bombs?
We were training for the invasion of Japan in Hawaii.
What was the reaction of yourself and the men to that?
The war was over, thank God.
Okay, now when you landed in Japan, now that was a naval base, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Big Navy base.
Yeah, yeah. What was it like there? Was there a lot of destruction? Or?
The town itself was leveled. As you came into the harbor, there was a huge, big church up on the hill, painted black. It turned out it was a Catholic church, and it had been painted completely black. And then part of the, as you got into town, I think it was, I forget the direction, would have been west, I guess, a little west of town. There was a lot of the Navy base still standing, and we used their buildings. It was like a naval academy. And an interesting thing happened as we went into the harbor. You know, they ran a couple of boats from the different ships into the dock to see how it would go, I suppose. I don't know how they do things. And our chaplain, Paul Bradley, who was quite a character, Father Paul Bradley, he jumped in one of them because he saw the Catholic church up there, and he went with one of the first boats in, which he wasn't supposed to do, and he got out and he walked up to the church, and there was a Japanese priest there, and later on we had a joint service with the Japanese priest and the Catholic priest, which was interesting. And we were there, and what they did was, I think, we always understood, they assigned the Marines for that part of the occupation because we had all the maps of that particular area for Operation Olympic, they were going to call it, the November invasion of Japan. And so we had all the maps of that area and knew where things were pretty much, I guess. And I remember because I was the S4, I was given a map that showed the whole town and beach and everything. So I think that's the reason the Marines were picked for that occupation duty until the Army replaced us gradually. And initially we broke our battalion, was given the job of going the whole length of Kyushu, having things surrendered to us, weapons, and checking things out, and so forth. We went all the way to Shimonoseki, which is the end of Kyushu, where you go across the water to Honshu. So we did that, and my job was to arrange the transportation of the battalion all the time, the movement, to line up trains or whatever we needed to, and then for places to sleep, like we found a ship in Shimonoseki that we used as headquarters, and we got terrific cooperation from the Japanese railroad moving the battalion when it was necessary and so forth. So I had to line up all that kind of thing, which was what my job was. Replaced us gradually. And initially we broke our battalion was given the job of going the whole length of Kyushu, uh, having things surrendered to us, weapons, and checking things out, and so forth. We went all the way to Shimonoseki, which is the end of Kyushu, where you go across the water to Honshu. So we did that, and my job was to arrange the transportation of the battalion all the time, the movement, to line up trains or whatever we needed to, and then for places to sleep. Like we found a ship in Shimonoseki that we used as headquarters, and we got terrific cooperation from the Japanese railroad, moving the battalion when it was necessary and so forth. So they had to line up all that kind of thing, which was what my job was.
What kind of relationships did you have with the Japanese people at all? Did you
Well, when we first
have contact?
got there, it was very interesting. I guess the people had heard the military and Marines were coming. They had all the women and children in the hills that we were going to rape all the women and everything. But very quickly they started coming back, and the guys, were giving the kids candy and giving them food off the ships. And we had very good relations. We had no trouble at all. We didn't have I don't think we had one incident in our battalion of any trouble going that whole distance. They had a little trouble with the Korean prisoners that were there. That I don't know if they were prisoners, but forced labor from Korea that Japan had there, and trying to organize them to get them on ships and get them back. They gave the guys some trouble. And they set their barracks on fire and did a few things, but we didn't have any trouble with the Japanese at all. Matter of fact, they'd invite us to their houses and places for meals, which we were prohibited from doing because they were so short of food. So if we went any place, we took bread from the ship or ice cream or something, but we wouldn't take any of their food.
Now you ended up occupying Nagasaki.
That's a little different story. At a certain point, we finished our duty in Kyushu, and they started sending. They broke up the 5th Division, and they sent troops from the 2nd and 5th Division home who'd been overseas a long time, who had a lot of points. So they made the rest of us all won the 2nd Division. So I was made part of the 2nd Division in Nagasaki.
What was it like in Nagasaki?
Before I get to Nagasaki, I should say that the amount of weapons and things they had all along the shore in Japan were very interesting. They obviously were preparing for an invasion eventually. And Nagasaki it was so bad, I almost draw a blank on it, parts of it, when I first saw it. And then the people, although I didn't get there until October, about 28th, I think, the first Marines had gotten there from the 2nd Division. See, they landed in Nagasaki, and the 5th Division, Sasebo. So they landed the same day, I think, September 24th, in Nagasaki. So they'd been there a while. They'd helped clean up a lot by the time I got there. But there was still a lot of people running around with skin hanging off. And it was unbelievable. And
Now, were there American medical units there that helped, or?
yeah, just when they came, I don't know. When I got there, I was transferred to the 2nd Division. You report in to the adjutant or something, and he was sitting outside the colonel's office, and he looked at my file, and he called to the colonel, and he says he was from the South, and he says, Colonel, we got a motorman out here. That's the way they said mortars. He said, Colonel, got a motorman out here. Colonel says, make a motor transport officer. So I was a motor transport officer for the 2nd Division. And so I went over to the motor transport pool, and I got hold of the sergeant in charge, and I told him, I said, listen, I don't know anything about this. I said, I told him what happened. And he said, I'll make a deal with you. He said, you come here at 8 o'clock every morning, be sure we're all working. And he said, there'll be a Jeep sitting there, and he said, get it back by 4:30, and I'll run everything, and you can just check us out. And so that's pretty much what happened for a couple of months. That's about the way it worked. I wasn't particularly interested in that part of the Marine Corps anyhow, and I became friends with the bishop of Nagasaki, Bishop Paul Yamaguchi. His cathedral had been destroyed by the bomb. It was about half a mile away. It was the largest religious building in the whole Far East at that time. It was beautiful. And most people don't realize, but there was a Christian section of Nagasaki that had been there since 1500 and something. And I believe there were Presbyterians and Catholics mostly. There might have been some other denominations. And the Catholics had this big cathedral. And because there was a couple of chaplains I knew, we were kind of interested in it, so we went over there and we met the bishop. And then he had been, what they did during the war was any young religious people, they were made like coal miners or something like that during the war. Whereas the bishop, because he had administrative responsibility and was older and stuff, he was made the administrator of an island. So he wasn't even in Nagasaki when the bomb was dropped. His mother and 2 sisters were, and they were killed. But he was not. He came back, and he hadn't been around his diocese in about 5 years. So on various days, I'd drive him to different places in the Jeep where he'd want to go. And
did he speak English?
yeah. A lot of the, I'd say, more educated did.
veterans, did you become active in any veterans groups at all, or?
Not until the 70s, when I heard about some of the people who are having trouble that have been in Nagasaki.
Now, were you having any health problems or at all, or?
Not that I really knew of, but it turned out we had some miscarriages. My wife had 3, and all our children, 4 children, were born early. But that could have been, but I don't know. I personally, you know, like I say, I'm over 91, and other than the last couple of years, I haven't had anything.
Now, what made you become interested in helping those that were there that were having health problems?
Well, you know, I got the 5th Division and 4th Division magazines, you know, because I joined them. I was life members of those in the 2nd Division. And I started hearing about some of the ones that were in Nagasaki, the bulldozer operators. That's were the first ones that that I heard about. In the early 70s, I guess one of them came down with cancer, 72, and a guy named Quigley from Oregon. And he contacted some of his buddies, and they had all had the same thing. And it got publicized, and so I retired in 1978 from work, and sort of got involved with the new National Association of Atomic Veterans, and started helping them, and worked a great deal with them through 1990, I guess.
Now, in 1988, you received an award from the Disabled American Veterans. What was that for?
Well, starting in 1980, we worked on getting recognition from the Veterans Administration the problems of atomic veterans. And that was a long, difficult struggle. I mean, we had congressional hearings, and when the veterans first went, and the widows first went to Congress in the late 70s, asking for, you know, this was a problem, they were all sort of considered kooks or communists or troublemakers. So it took, I'd say, 8 years of intensive lobbying to gain proper recognition. I have a excerpt here from a talk that the present Secretary of Veterans Affairs gave to the National Association of Atomic Veterans meeting last year.
Now, how many men do they feel were affected by this?
Well, over 250,000 of various branches of the military were exposed in tests in the Pacific and in Nevada. And then 100 and some thousand were exposed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So they roughly think there were about 500,000 all members of different branches of service, doing a whole lot of different things,
Mhm.
whether it was taking air samples in airplanes or scuba diving and tests in the Pacific. I mean, all kinds of ways they were exposed. But this, to give you an idea, this is what the Secretary of Veterans Affairs had to say about this. He gave a good summary of the history because he was one of the ones we worked with in the 80s when he was a Senate aide. Anthony Principi, he's now Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and a very competent man, but just I could read this, it would probably be best. This is quoting him. On July 16th, 1945, a new light burst upon the face of the earth at 5:30 a.m. Mountain wartime, not far from Alamogordo, New Mexico. At that time, President Truman called the energy of that light a new force too revolutionary to consider in the framework of old ideas, which was a way of us saying that no one really knew what we were getting into. The burden was placed on your shoulders, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines on duty from 1945 to 1963 to take on the role of living test subjects in order for scientists and researchers and government policymakers to gain answers to the questions posed by ionizing radiation. Little did you know as you patrolled the streets of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that the war had just ended for millions of U.S. servicemen was still exposing you to danger. Little did you know that the tasks of scrubbing down ships, unprotected, bare-chested, and unmasked in the Bikini Atoll after nuclear tests would come back to haunt you and your families year after those ships were nothing more than rusting hulks on the ocean floor. And little did you know that the open-air tests you witnessed in the Nevada desert would leave you vulnerable to hidden wounds, not from bullets and shrapnel, but from neutrons and gamma rays. For 18 years, you and your colleagues in uniform participated in above-ground nuclear tests without hesitation, aware of some risk, but nonetheless committed as citizen soldiers have always been to advancing freedom's cause. You were the pioneers of the atomic age, helping to lift the veil surrounding the mysteries of the atom. What you didn't know was that you were risking a dear price for every lesson that was learned. You battled an invisible enemy, ionizing radiation, and that enemy can leave physical and emotional scars just as real as the scars borne by veterans wounded during the Battle of the Bulge or hit by fire during the battle for Pork Chop Hill, or injured during the Battle of the Coral Sea, or shot down during the air battles over Vietnam. Their battles were real, and so were yours. Their wounds were real, and so was the damage inflicted by ionizing radiation. There can be no doubt that the answers revealed during those tests provided invaluable life-saving data that would have protected American military personnel should the worst war possible before mankind. What we learned from these tests also helped educate and prepare our nation's civilian population, and much of the information became valuable data for medical research and advanced many treatment technologies. But that knowledge is of little comfort to atomic veterans exposed to ionizing radiation that may have torn silently into tissue and precious organs, to begin its insidious campaign to defeat your bodies. The battle was on, but you barely knew it. This morning, almost 6 decades after Trinity, and 40 years after the end of above-ground testing, atomic veterans are still looking to government for full accountability and for nothing less and nothing more than fair treatment for your illnesses. I know the road to the answers you seek has been long and frustrating one, just not for you, but to your families as well. Few of us who attended the hearings on Capitol Hill in 1980 will ever forget the heart-wrenching stories told by atomic veterans bearing terrible scars and painful disabilities. That's from Anthony Principi at a meeting last year to the National Association of Atomic Veterans.